What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for tonight's Monday Night Football slate, where we've got two games on the docket to break down and going to get you ready for all of your exposure here. We're first off going to focus on the Draftkings side and what we're doing for our lineups. That'll include some strategy for the two-game slate, an injury report, also a few plays that I'll be getting over the field on. And then afterwards, we're going to focus on the pick'em and the prop side of things. They're Underdog and Prize Picks props for here for this Monday Night Football slate, and a couple props that I've already entered you might want to consider tailing for yourself. So by the end, you have a game plan for everything that you're doing for this evening. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on in with first off a look at the DFS slate. Unlike a main slate where game scripting isn't a huge factor when we have so many players in our lineup construction, it is a factor when we only have two games to work with. So tonight we've got two relatively close spreads. First game is a 50-point over-under. A lot of fireworks expected between the Bills and the Falcons. Then even that second game between the Commanders and the Bears, close competitive game expected, and it's not like it's a low total over there either. A little bit more weather, some potential rain that you might have in that second game, which makes it a little bit less attractive for fantasy purposes. But before we even start clicking players or going position by position and talking about the best plays and all of that kind of stuff, we've got a game script ahead of time. And what I mean by that is if you think one of the two games is going to be a much better game environment, go over its implied total, be competitive, etc., then get more exposure to that game. Out of all your skill position spots, you might want to take 2/3 or maybe even 3/4 of your players from that side of things, because if we get more offensive production from one of the two games, you're definitely going to want to lean in that direction. So whether it's playing for a lower scoring script, an onslaught script, obviously if a team's playing for way ahead, the other side's going to be more of that pass first mode. We start to think about that when we build our showdown lineups, but on a two-gamer like this, it also should be in consideration. So keep that in the back of your mind. And you can see at the quarterback position that the two teams that are going to be chalked tonight are going to be the Bills and then the Commanders. And I would say the Bills probably even more so than some of the other teams. James Cook at running back is extremely popular. Other side of that game, Bijan Robinson is the most popular running back that we have on the slate. So if you go to the second game in particular, maybe to a Bears-sided stack, the side that's the underdog in that second game, then you could try and get some differentiation at quarterback. And the one thing I'll say about Caleb Williams is that his points per dollar projection is 3.57x, which would be really useful if we had tight pricing across the board. But as you'll see when we go position by position, that you can use almost all of the chalk, almost all the really expensive players on the slate, and still have all the salary to work with that you want. So even though it is a solid, efficient price tag at $5,600, I don't know if you're going to need that at some of the other positions. Michael Penix is your lowest owned quarterback of the four. He has the least amount of rushing upside, so that's probably, a lot to do with why that's the case. These top two have a ton of rushing upside. Their ceiling is 25 to 30 points, and in particular in a close competitive game, these quarterbacks go for 30 points every once in a while, and if they do that, that is going to be the quarterback that you have to have tonight. So that's why I think the ownership is so skewed on those two players. In fact, if you add up their ownership, it's about 70% combined on those top two options. So if you're in the large field GPPs and you don't plan on getting differentiation by leaving salary on the table or by taking some pivots at the running back or wide receiver position, then you might want to consider going to one of these bottom two quarterbacks instead. And in single entries, in contests where the ownership isn't as big of a deal, where people aren't actively trying to get different in their lineups, these top two quarterbacks could be 80 to even 90% combined ownership. So if you're in a single entry and you're really trying to get frisky, Penix would probably be about 5% of those sort of builds, and then a Caleb Williams will probably be about 15% in that sort of build as well, and that would be at the very most, I'd say. Next up, we got the running back position, which has a lot of chalk towards the top. They've got 82.5% ownership on a Robinson. A James Cook, also extremely popular on the other side of that game. They're the favorites, so I would say with the correlation aspect that I actually like Cook a little bit more than Robinson. He's also $1,000 cheaper, so if you're trying to use some of the spend ups at wide receiver, quarterback, one of those top two quarterbacks, going down from a Bijan to a James Cook can help you make up for that price difference. And considering that the Bijan Robinson side are underdogs against Buffalo, Bijan does have some receiving upside at the same time though, so it's not like it completely takes him out of the script. That's why, if Cook's going to come in 20% lower owned and he's going to be $1,000 cheaper, I'll probably have a little bit more Cook in my portfolio. But not to say that Bijan's not a play, I'll definitely have some. At 82.5% though, I might end up coming under the field on that because, using them in every single lineup still wouldn't even be leverage at about 17.5% over the field. So I might go 50-50, might just use him in half my builds and punt the other half. And if he gets there, I'll have some exposure and I'll have some lineups and combinations to try and take something down. But he's also not going to be the end-all be-all for me either, as the script, in particular, a negative game script when playing for behind, would really hamper his projection long-term. We've also got a Ja'Cory Cross get merit worth noting noting that you've got some running backs banged up for Washington still. Even some of their backups, like a Chris Rodriguez, aren't at 100% strength, so they're really expecting JCM to get a lot of the touches tonight. That's why his projection's at over a 2.7x points per dollar value. So though, they're in that slower scoring script, it is expected to be a little bit rainy towards this afternoon. That might lead to some extra rushing usage for the Commander side, and as favorites, that would really benefit JCM in this sort of a game. We've also got a DeAndre Swift who's only $5,500. Kind of surprising that he's cheaper than a JCM is, especially on the team that is the Slate underdog. And with the rain, with the extra usage that these running backs could be getting, these two are going to be priorities for me, in particular if that weather forecast holds up. If we get a steady rain for the first 2 or even 3 hours of that game this evening, that is going to make these projections probably closer to 2.8 or even 2.9x when it's all said and done. Tyler Algier, you can't ignore him in the large field GPPs. Of course, backup to Bijan Robinson, does see quite a large snap share every single week though. Something in that 30 to 45% range is typically what Tyler will play, and as long as the game script isn't too negative, they are of course underdogs against the Bills. If they're playing from ahead or within a score or two, he'll probably still see that 35 to 40% snap share. If they're playing from way behind though, that's where he might only get closer to 15 to 20% of the snaps. On Jeremy McNichols, somebody to keep an eye on with some of the injuries that you've had on the Commander side, but not projecting through the roof or anything at only 5.4 points. Ray Davis, he's the kind of player that could get there if the Bills are playing from way ahead. If it's an onslaught script and they're trying to run out the clock in the second half, you're going to see a lot of James Cook, but you're also going to see some Ray Davis mixed in there as well. A bruising back, somebody that even yards after contact is the best back that they have on Buffalo. So in GPPs, you can see I'm throwing in some exposure there. Chris Rodriguez Jr., though he's a little bit banged up, assuming that he plays tonight, he could be in play for at least some differentiation at the bottom of the running back position. And you can see over here, I have these guys down as Y only in GPPs. And that's because in single entries or cash or anything that only has a couple hundred to maybe 1,000 entries in it, there's no reason to use these players down low. There's quite literally zero scenario where you should be going to that sort of an option unless you have some premonition or something ahead of time where you just know that these guys are going to score and go off. With the salary being so soft on these 2-game slates, even if you go to the elite tier quarterback like a Daniels or an Allen, a Bijan, a James Cook at the running back position, as long as you're taking some sort of a value, maybe at defense, a value wide receiver, or a value tight end at one of those last few spots that you're trying to fill in towards the end of your lineup, you're going to have all the salary that you want to take those elite tier players. So that's why the only reason you should be going to these sort of options are in large field GPPs where you're trying to make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself with the rest of the field, but also making sure that you have some leverage to move up in them as well, because there's a scenario where James Cook gets hurt and Ray Davis ends up being the optimal running back. There's a scenario where JCM goes down with an injury and Chris Rodriguez ends up being the optimal captain. In those smaller field contests where, I shouldn't say captain, optimal play tonight. No captain, of course, on the 2-gamer. But tonight, in the large field GPPs, when you have to beat 100,000 other people, there are going to be people that mix in these running backs. And if they end up being the optimal play and you want to win the 100,000 to first, the 250K to first, or the Millie Maker, which I believe we have for this kind of a slate, then you've got to have one of these guys in your player pool. But if you're in a contest with only a couple hundred people where maybe no one's even going to use one of these two running backs, then you don't have to have the absolute nuts to take it down. So that's why they're GPP only sort of plays for me. And you're going to see that towards the bottom end of the wide receiver board as well. Speaking of wide receivers, let's circle over there. Deebo Samuel's questionable, but is expected to play tonight. Terry McLaurin is going to be out for the Commanders, though, so that is something that they're dealing with on offense. Perhaps a little bit of wide receiver value that we're going to talk about here towards the bottom end of the board. But Aroma Dunze is your most expensive wide receiver on the slate. Drake London is only $6,200, and he's the best projecting wide receiver. So for me, Drake London is going to be the priority up top, in particular if the ownership is as flat as it looks on these top 3 players. And a Dunze 62%, 61.5% on a Deebo. Then Drake London, who's by far the best projection of all of them, is there only 68%. So I think he should probably be getting a little bit more steam. I don't have him down as a yes quite yet, just because I want to see what the ownership looks like as we get closer to lock. I'm imagining that people are going to be seeing a lot of the same that I am here, where he's the best wide receiver and he's a little bit cheaper than some of these other guys, and he could get closer to 75 and 80%. And because as of right now, I don't have Michael Penix in my quarterback player pool, this is just as of right now now, of course, guys, this is from my Patreon page, the projections that you're seeing here. As the day goes on, I will be updating them as we get news, as we get a better industry sentiment when it comes to the ownership numbers. And if we get to this evening and it's looking like London's going to be 75 to 80% owned, and I don't have Michael Penix in my player pool, then there's a chance that I fade a Drake London in my exposure. But as of now, if he's going to hold this sort of an ownership number, even if Penix isn't in my player pool, I'll probably have some Drake London as a one-off in a few scenarios on top of that. A DJ Moore is here at $5,400. He doesn't project the best, but his ownership really falls off compared to these top tier wide receivers. And what's worth noting about DJ Moore is that he's got yards after catch ability for days. He's one of the most physically gifted wide receivers that we have in the NFL. So Rome Odunze has been more of that deep down the field threat at this point. He's got that high ball ability that DJ Moore doesn't really have. DJ Moore still has that ceiling potential within him. So in large field GPPs, if you're looking to get some differentiation, I like guys like Moore to do so. A Keon Coleman be another example of that. He's a high upside wide receiver with some yak ability. Also can high point a football in the red zone as well. The issue with Coleman is that he's one of many wide receivers for Buffalo that will see usage tonight. You know, it's not just a Coleman, a Shakir. You've also got a Palmer mixing in. Curtis Samuel might even play for them at a few times. You know, just even your double tight ends. You've got a Knox. You've got a Kincaid up top. You've got all those running backs that they mix in, whether it be a Cook, you've got a Johnson, also a Ray Davis towards the bottom end of the board. That's why the projection on Coleman, at least from the median standpoint, isn't going to stand out as much as some of these other tier players, but he's the wide receiver one, and we'll put that in quotes because there's not really a wide receiver one of Buffalo, but technically your wide receiver one, and is going to get a lot of that red zone usage, so don't sleep on him for a little bit of differentiation. I like myself some Khalil Shakir. Unfortunately, though, he is getting a little bit more ownership than a Keon Coleman. The reason for that's the median projection is a little bit more favorable. He's at 11.7 raw points on Draftkings. Main reason for that is that he's a PPR stud. Draftkings is a full PPR website, so more possession wide receivers like Khalil are going to project a little bit safer than their counterparts like Coleman. But if you're talking about ceiling, Coleman has an infinitely higher ceiling than a Shakir. So at least for me in large field GPPs, he's the one with more upside, whereas Shakir's the quote-unquote safer play that you'd be using in cash and single entries. And then when we get past Shakir, it drops off like a rock. And I mean like the projections aren't even remotely similar after we get after Shakir here. And this is the leverage range. We talked about a few leverage running backs, you know, game scripting sort of plays, injury plays that could get there from that scenario. Towards the bottom end of wide receiver, this is big play or touchdown or bust kind of scenario. But the thing that's beautiful about wide receivers is that they play 3 wide receiver sets at times in the NFL. And of course, your 4th or even 5th string wide receivers are going to circle in because of all the routes that those other guys are running. It's, you know, it's taxing. It's, you know, exhausting when you're running all of those routes throughout an entire game. So these guys down here are all going to play, the ones that I have projected on the board here, and if they can score a long touchdown, that's their way to the optimal lineup. Now, just like these cheap tier running backs, should you be using them in single entries and cash? Absolutely not. You would be an absolute fool to be paying these players in single entries or cash. There's just no reason to do so. There's no upside for playing somebody that has 1.5 to 2x points per dollar value when you could be getting 2.5 to 3x points per dollar value on every single spot that you're putting into your lineup. So there are a few exceptions down here, like maybe a Zacchaeus that I could see using in that kind of a build where he's over that 2x points per dollar value, but that's rare. And there's not a whole lot of these wide receivers that I'd be using in that kind of format. But a Josh Palmer has big play upside. He's got an extremely low floor as, I guess, technically the wide receiver 3/4 for Buffalo. But if he can turn one of those into a 40, 50 yard gain or even a touchdown in the red zone, he's got a lot more equity than some of these other players to get to that kind of performance. The quote-unquote safe play down here was Zacchaeus, like I was saying. Part of the reason for that is he's such a PPR-heavy wide receiver. Also has shown quite a bit of chemistry with Caleb Williams to start this year, so don't roll him out even in the GPPs as well. You got a Jalen Lane. He'll be playing a bit more with Terry McLaurin rolled out for the Commanders. Also with the Darnell Mooney injury, you're going to have some extra wide receiver usage opening up for the Falcons. So if this was a showdown slate and these guys were like $200 to $15 or even $2,000, we would be jamming in some of these wide receivers. Like a Casey Washington, if you're playing the showdown slate tonight, throw him in a bunch of lineups. A Jalen Lane, same thing. But what we have to consider here is that they're $3,000. That's why if you're in the single entries of cash, I'd call you a fool for playing these sort of in options down here. But in the GPPs where you're trying to get a sub 5 or even a sub 2 to 3% owned to play, that's where they have that kind of utility. So we mentioned a few options there. Got a Tyrell Shavers towards the bottom as well. High upside, downfield wide receiver for Buffalo. But because he's wide receiver 4 or 5 for them, he's not going to see the field very often. So these are extremely risky plays, high variance wide receivers towards the bottom, but on a 2-game slate, there's a time and place for getting to them. And then at the tight end position, it is extremely weak. Kyle Pitts Sr. is the best projection at just a little bit over 10 points. He's 40% owned, and I frankly don't agree with that all that much. The most expensive and also the highest owned players that we have at wide receiver and tight end, second priciest is Kyle Pitts, and he's 40% owned. We have Drake London, who's nearly 70% owned, maybe a little bit too cheap at $6,200. But that's also the worst quarterback that we have on the slate. Michael Penix Jr. has by far the worst projection at that position. So that's why I'm a little bit hesitant on a Drake, especially if he gets closer to that 75 to 80% ownership number. And then even at tight end here, if Pitts stays at 40%, or God forbid, if he gets closer to 45 or even 50% projected owned, these could be spots that I'm actively trying to fade, because you can't play everyone on a slate like this. You've got to find spots to have that conviction and get some leverage to the field. And projection-wise, I know they're standing out individually, but we have to be thinking about that scripting. That's what we started off with when we got here to the DFS section. I was mentioning the possibility of one of these 2 games going way over. A team only scoring like maybe 7 to 13 points on offense would be absolutely catastrophic for the players that they have on that team. So just keep that in mind with some of these ownership numbers. You can't play all the chalk across the board. If you do plan on playing chalk at all of your different positions, plan on leaving $1,500 to $2,000 on the table to try and overcome and not duplicate yourself with the entire field. You've also got a Zach Ertz here at $3,600. He's got a solid points per dollar projection, but still getting some ownership just like a Kincaid is. And just like running back and wide receiver, you do have some of these tertiary tight ends that you could use, but I'm not going overboard with them. I've got a Cole Kmet in there. He's playing a whole bunch of snaps for the Bears. I'm also playing a Dawson Knox who plays 30 to 40% of the snaps for the Buffalo Bills every single game. Not so much these guys that are lucky to play 15 to 20% of snaps, and it's usually due to injury, or if they're playing from way ahead and have to have 2 tight end sets to run out the clock. I want the guys that'll play no matter what, pretty much regardless of script, veterans in the case of a Kmet and a Knox, and also sub 5% ownership on them. So that's what we're looking at, the skill positions. At the defense, I think you punt it. Defense is not really that much strategy in DFS, in particular on a 2-game slate. If there's a defensive touchdown, you're going to have that team. If there's a team that gets you 2 sacks and 2 turnovers, you're probably going to have them as well. And as of now, I've got all the defenses in my player pool except for the Commanders. And it's just the ownership on them, 42.6%. You've got to fade somebody at all of these different positions. And because it's so random and so hard to predict on a slate like this, I'd rather just play the lower owned defenses. So that's personally what I'm thinking I'm going to do for tonight's exposure. But as the slate goes on, guys, make sure to check out my Patreon page for all these updated projections. As we get more news and a better industry sentiment on where the field's going to go with ownership, we'll update that. Also, make some of the necessary player pool changes to account for all of those differences in ownership and give you guys an up-to-date look on what I'm doing for tonight. So link in the description to go out there and check out the Patreon page. NFL DFS tier is how you get access to all of this. And only $15 a month will give you access to all the showdown slates that I'm covering here on the channel, as well as all the main slates for NFL this season. And now for the prop of the betting side, where I've got these 2 props that I've already entered for tonight that give you a better payout than what you can get on the sportsbooks. And that's not normally the case when we get a goblin prop like we have on Bijan Robinson. Normally the payouts on the books are far better than what Prize Picks and Underdog will offer. But on this 2-leg, with the correlation that we're getting in each spot, it's actually better here on Prize Picks. So one of the few times that we'll be using one of these goblin props on a piece of content like this, and the 2.75x payout is better than Hard Rock, which is giving you about 2.6x plus 160 odds is actually what they're posting. But FanDuel, Draftkings are about that plus 160 as well. So the plus 175 odds that we're getting here on Prize Picks, better than what you can find elsewhere. And Bijan Robinson, a player that'll be involved with an offense through the air and on the ground. I've got Buffalo as the clear favorites tonight. I know it's only a 3.5 point spread. Even though the Buffalo's on the road, I don't agree with that. I think they should be touchdown, maybe even a little bit over touchdown favorites. So if they're playing from behind, I don't have that as much of an issue for Bijan, because he does have that receiving upside as a halfback. And then with Josh Allen, it's a 50-point total in that game, by the way. By far the higher total of the 2 games, one of the highest totals that we have of the week, I believe just behind that Chiefs-Lions game from last night. And if it's going to be a high-scoring game, Josh Allen's throwing for 2+ touchdowns. I mean, he's done it in 4 of his 5 starts so far this year. I know that he's got the rushing ability, and same same thing with a James Cook on the ground, but the Falcons defense is legit, right? They're not the kind of defense that's just going to get ran over on the ground. So I think it's going to be a little bit more hard to score in the red zone. It's going to take a little bit more effort for this Buffalo team to be able to pull that off, which normally leads to more usage for Josh Allen through the air. So 1.5 passing touchdowns. He's close to -130 on all of the major books. I believe like FanDuel has him -133. Pinnacle had him like -128. So not quite the plus EV mark where we're trying to get to -135, -140 before we declare that. But what makes this a plus EV slip is the fact that we have the correlation between these two, and it's essentially not giving us the correlation ding. You've got the touchdowns on both sides. This is obviously correlating towards the close, competitive, and high-scoring game. And this Goblin is already taking it from a 3x payout down to 2.75x. And you would think that it would take it down further than that because of that correlation, but I believe the coding on PrizePicks, something that has to do with these Goblin props and two-mans, doesn't treat the correlation the same way. So, until they fix that and until it matches some of the single-game parlay payouts that you'll see on these other sites, this is the kind of spot on a pick'em site like this to get this kind of exposure in there. And this is just the first piece of prop exposure that we'll be entering for this evening. If you guys want to see all the exposure that we're going with for Monday Night Football, already a few slips on top of this that we've already entered. Jane Daniels over on 7 rushing attempts, which is now at 8.5 on the book. So, no point in me even using it as a play here on this live stream, right? That's why we went out there and gave you guys a slip for the first game instead. But if you want access to all these props before they bump a whole attempt and a half like we had here at a Jane Daniels, then make sure to check out the Patreon for that. Link in the description. NFL prop tier is how you get access to all the Underdog and PrizePicks stuff I'm entering, as well as the stuff I'm entering on the sports books like Hard Rock Bet. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the DFS and prop preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come, including our Thursday Night Football preview, our main slate preview for week 7 of the NFL season, all of the content to come throughout the rest of 2025. Best of luck with everything that you guys are going with, whether it's in the large field GPPs or with any props or bets that you're going with for tonight. Hope we can cash out, add to the bankroll. Go ahead and comment down below as well who you've got as the top scorer for this slate. It'll be between the 2 games, whoever the top raw scorer is on Draftkings. If you guess them first, you'll win a free month access to everything I have on my Patreon. That includes the projection sheets that you saw before as the update closer to lock, also for every slate that we have in 2025, as well as all the Underdog and PrizePicks exposure that I'm entering for this month. You'll win that free month access just by guessing that top score, and considering that there's some studs on the slate, you want to guess quickly, right? Guess it before anyone steals like your Josh Allen or your Bijan Robinson from you. And if you end up getting that player correct, you'll win that free of charge right there. But that's all, guys. I appreciate your support of the channel as usual. I hope to see you guys towards the very top, and I'll see you for the Thursday Night Football preview later on this week.